Hey guys, tonight we sail far north past the edges of comfort and into a world where even daylight feels frozen in the air. We are stepping into the land that once dared the impossible, Greenland, where Viking settlers carved homes out of permafrost and tried to outlast winters that could reach -65 degrees Celsius. Imagine waking each morning to find the ocean itself sealed in armor, your breath turning instantly to frost, and your fire struggling to remember what warmth even means. You probably would not survive this, but for a few centuries, some of the toughest people on Earth actually did. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to the sound of wind clawing across a wooden roof. The air is still black with night, yet even in darkness the cold finds you. The fur around your face is stiff with frost, your eyelashes crusted white, your lips dry enough to crack when you move. Inside the longhouse, the world feels muffled. The thick walls of sod and timber trap the little heat that remains from last night's fire. But the cold presses through them all the same. Like a patient intruder, the hearth at the center glows faintly, a bed of red coals beneath the ash, but no flame dances yet. You hear movement, someone shifting, pulling a cloak tighter, then the dull scrape of iron on stone as a spark is struck. Fire is not just warmth here, it is survival's heartbeat. When it dies, so does everything else. The first sparks catch on dry moss, then straw, then bark peeled from driftwood, gathered days before. You watch as the light grows, timid at first, then stronger, licking upward to paint the low ceiling with gold. The smell of smoke fills the room, sharp and comforting. Around you figures stir, family, neighbors, others who share the longhouse. The Vikings built their homes to endure, not to comfort. The walls are thick, layered with turf over wood beams, the roof sloping low to keep heat from escaping. There are no windows, only narrow slits sealed with stretched animal stomachs that let in a ghost of light. Every surface carries the same scent: smoke, wool, salt, and sweat. You breathe it in as if it were air itself. Outside, the wind howls across the fjord, a voice of ice dragging its fingers through the valley. It carries the rattle of frozen trees, the groan of the sea trapped beneath its own surface, and the distant cry of ravens that circle above what little movement survives. The fire grows, and soon the longhouse stirs fully. Boots stamp against the packed earth floor. A kettle is set to hang above the flames, filled with water melted from blocks of ice, hacked from the river the day before. There is no running water in this place. No stream that flows in winter, only ice, endless, patient, and cruelly beautiful. You pull yourself up, the weight of your wool cloak heavy across your shoulders. Your breath smokes in the air, curling in faint ribbons. It is morning in Greenland, sometime in the 14th century, and the outside world may as well not exist. Weeks may pass before you hear news from another farmstead, months before a ship dares to cross the sea. But inside this longhouse, there is life, stubborn, defiant, flickering like the flames that keep it alive. Breakfast is not luxury here. It is necessity measured in calories. You ladle porridge thick with barley and bits of dried meat, perhaps seal fat if luck has smiled. The taste is plain, heavy, but it spreads warmth down your chest like a blessing. Children huddle near the hearth, their faces flushed with heat, their fingers clutching wooden bowls. Adults eat slower, not because of manners, but because they are calculating how much wood remains, how many days until the next hunt, how long the livestock will hold against the frost. There is always a quiet arithmetic of survival here. How much food, how much fuel, how many hours of light before night folds in again. When the sun finally rises, it barely clears the horizon. The light is thin, almost metallic, and it slides over the snow without warmth. You step outside, and the cold hits you like a wall. The air is so sharp it makes your teeth ache. You can feel it in your lungs, in your skull, even in your bones. Every sound is brittle. The creak of the wooden door, the crunch of boots in the snow, the soft crack as ice shifts on the river. The sky above is pale blue, a color too cold to comfort. In the distance, mountains rise like jagged teeth, their faces streaked with frozen waterfalls that have not moved in months. Somewhere beyond them, the ocean waits, frozen into silence. You move toward the pens where the animals are kept. Small cattle, sheep, goats, the creatures that stubbornly share your fate in this land of frost. Their breath curls in clouds, their hides crusted with ice. They are the measure of your wealth and your survival. Without them there is no milk, no hides, no meat. You push open the gate, feed them the last of the stored hay, and pray the spring, if it ever comes, will come before hunger does. In the Viking tongue there are dozens of words for frost, for snow, for the shifting forms of ice. Each word is a kind of respect, an acknowledgement of an enemy that cannot be conquered but can be named. From the ridge above the settlement you can see the fjord stretching outward like a wound cut through the land. The sea is sealed in white armor, but you can still smell the salt in the wind. The ruins of a dock sit crooked under snow, where once a ship might have brought iron, grain, or new faces. Now only ghosts arrive. You remember when the first settlers came here, centuries ago, chasing stories of green valleys and pastures rich enough for cattle. They called it Greenland, perhaps in hope, perhaps in irony. Whatever the reason, the name has long since become a curse whispered between frozen lips. The cold here is not like the cold of other lands. It is alive. It moves. It watches. You can feel it seeping through layers of wool and fur, probing for weakness. The settlers learned early that warmth was not a luxury but a craft. Every garment is layered, linen against skin to wick sweat, wool above it to trap heat, fur over all to shield from wind. Every seam is checked, every gap sealed. A single exposed fingertip can blacken before the fire is built again. You glance down at your hands, the knuckles cracked and pale, and wonder how much longer they will obey you. Inside the longhouse again, the fire crackles louder now. Someone adds another log, the sparks bursting like stars. The air grows thick with the smell of smoke and fat. Meat hangs from the rafters. Seal, fish, sometimes whale if fortune blessed the hunters. The walls glisten faintly with grease, polished by years of smoke and touch. There is beauty in it, though none of the delicate kind. It is the beauty of persistence, of life held together by grit and habit. Outside, storms rage that can freeze a man solid in an hour. Inside, you can almost believe in warmth. You sit near the fire and trace lines in the dirt with a stick. Around you, conversation hums quietly. Words about trade, about the weather, about God, and the old gods both. Faith here is a layered thing, like clothing. Some wear the cross, others still carve Thor's hammer into wood, and most carry both. Because in a place like this, you take every blessing you can get. You pray to Christ for mercy, and to Thor for endurance. You ask both to keep the fire alive through the night. The day is short. By mid-afternoon, the light begins to fade and the shadows grow long. The temperature drops again, though it never truly rises. You step outside one last time before darkness comes, looking out over the settlement, smoke rising from a handful of longhouses, dogs curled against walls, children chasing one another briefly before retreating inside. The air glows faintly blue, that peculiar color of polar dusk, and for a moment everything feels still. You can hear the river groaning under its shell of ice, the wood in the walls shifting as it contracts, the faint whisper of wind sliding down from the glacier. In the distance, the northern lights ripple faintly, green curtains moving soundlessly across the sky. You stand there, breath freezing in your scarf, and understand why so few ever left once they came. There is a terrible beauty here, a kind that takes root beneath your ribs and never leaves. Night falls without ceremony. The wind rises again, pushing against the longhouse like a living thing. Inside, the fire roars higher, the heat pressing close. You lie beneath layers of fur, listening to the world outside, the crackle of logs, the sigh of wind through gaps, the distant bark of dogs warning at shadows that may be nothing at all. Sleep comes slowly, not as rest but as surrender. You dream of ships, of green pastures that may never have existed, of home, whatever that means now. Somewhere in the darkness, a log collapses into embers, sending a spray of sparks upward, and the sound is almost like rain. And though the cold waits beyond the walls, though it will come again with morning, you find yourself thinking, not of fear, but of awe, that in a place where everything freezes, something still burns. The wind has changed by the time you step outside again. It no longer rushes down from the glacier, but drifts in from the sea, heavier, colder, carrying a faint smell of salt and iron. In the distance, the fjord gleams under a pale sun, its surface a mosaic of frozen shards. Once, long ago, a fleet of ships cut across this same water, their sails fat with wind, their hulls loaded with cattle and grain. You picture it now, carved dragon heads slicing through ice, oars dipping into grey waves, and the first Vikings of Eric the Red staring into a horizon of fog and snow, convinced they had found the edge of the world. You can almost hear the sound of their shouts, their laughter carried thinly across centuries, the slap of frozen ropes and the creak of wood tightening in the cold. The arrival must have felt like stepping into another planet. Greenland, the word itself a trick of the tongue, a lure whispered back in Iceland to convince settlers that life could bloom here. But when those longships ground against the rocky coast, when the first boots sank into snow instead of grass, it was already clear the name was a prayer, not a promise. They came with cattle, iron, and faith, but the land offered only silence and stone. No forests waited for their axes, no soft soil for their ploughs. The earth was frozen, the wind merciless, and yet they built anyway. You imagine standing among them on that first day, the sea still steaming from the journey, the mountains looming ahead like black teeth. They unloaded everything they owned, timber scavenged from Norway, iron nails, carved icons, and stubborn hope. The first shelters were little more than boxes of turf and stone, roofs covered with sod, smoke holes cut through the top to let fire breathe. The cold crept through every crack. Nights were endless. Even the stars seemed distant, dimmed by the curtain of frost. And yet they stayed, because the Viking way was not to flee but to endure, to carve life where no one else dared. Each new settlement began with the same rhythm, a longhouse first, then a barn, then fences for the animals brought across the sea. The sound of hammers and axes filled the valley, echoing against cliffs that had never known such noise. They used what little driftwood the ocean surrendered, every plank precious. Stones were hauled from the shore, fitted together without mortar, and sealed with turf that froze into something harder than brick. It was slow work, exhausting, but in time the skeleton of a colony emerged, small, scattered, but alive. The settlers called their first homes Brattahlid, Gartha, and later Western Settlement, names that still cling faintly to the ruins even now. They planted grass where they could, coaxing green from grey, and watched the horizon for ships that would bring more souls brave or desperate enough to join them. For a while they believed they could build a new Norway here. The fjords at least looked the part. In summer, when the sun lingered and the ice receded, the valleys gleamed with moss and wildflowers, and the mountains reflected gold in the water. But winter always returned like a debt collector, and each year it came earlier. The sea was both gate and prison. It gave them fish, seals, and the occasional whale carcass, but it also cut them off from the world. A single storm could delay ships for a season, or forever. And when ships did come, they carried not only goods but news. Whispers of plague in Europe, wars between kings, and sometimes nothing at all. You can almost feel the hunger that came with waiting, the way people gathered on cliffs to watch the horizon for sails that might never appear. Every gust of wind could be hope or heartbreak. Inside the longhouses, life pressed on. Families slept shoulder to shoulder, sharing heat. The air was thick with the smell of animals, because livestock were brought indoors during the worst months. Cows tied near the door, sheep clustered by the walls, chickens scratching in corners. It was loud, dirty, but necessary. You imagine the sounds: snoring humans, lowing cattle, the hiss of the stove, the occasional cough of someone whose lungs had begun to freeze from the damp. Disease moved quietly in such places, traveling through the air like a ghost. But the alternative, to let the animals die outside, was unthinkable. The Vikings learned quickly that Greenland demanded respect. They studied the habits of seals and birds, the patterns of wind and light, the way ice thickened in the fjords. They became observers of survival, every sense tuned to weather's mood. When the sea froze solid, they crossed it on foot to hunt. When the snow melted for a few brief weeks, they planted barley and prayed it would ripen before the frost returned. Sometimes it did, often it did not, and still they tried again, because not trying meant death. You picture one of those early summers, the settlement bathed in light, children chasing each other barefoot through the grass, women spreading fish to dry on wooden racks, men mending nets near the shore. The smell of salt and smoke fills the air, gulls cry overhead, and for a few fleeting weeks it feels like the name Greenland might finally make sense. But beyond the valley, glaciers glitter like walls, reminders that the warmth is borrowed, not earned. The ice always comes back, patient and absolute. By late autumn, preparations begin again. Meat is salted, milk turned into cheese, hay stacked high for the animals. Every task carries the weight of urgency, because each mistake will be paid for in frostbite or starvation. The sea darkens, the winds sharpen, and the sun sinks lower each day until it barely clears the mountains at noon. The world contracts. Outside, there is only white and silence. Inside, the longhouse grows heavy with smoke and fatigue. Conversations slow, tempers shorten, and even laughter feels fragile. But still, someone keeps the fire alive. At night, when the wind moans across the roof and frost crawls through the cracks, you understand why they stayed. The Norse were not drawn here by comfort but by challenge. To them, this was proof that a person could carve a home at the edge of the world and defy it simply by breathing another day. It was the same spirit that had sent their ancestors raiding across Europe, that had built ships able to cross oceans when others barely dared to leave shore. Greenland was not a mistake. It was an extension of their myth, the ultimate test of endurance. Still, you wonder how many lay awake some nights, staring at the rafters, wondering if they had gone too far. The cold has a way of whispering doubts into even the bravest hearts. It seeps into bones, slows the pulse, turns confidence to exhaustion. Yet morning always came, and with it, duty, feeding animals, hauling ice, mending roofs, praying the firewood would last until spring. Centuries later, archaeologists would dig through the ruins of these settlements and find traces of that stubborn life: a carved comb, a child's shoe, the iron tip of a plough, beads traded from Europe. Every object tells the same quiet story. They tried. Against all odds, they tried. And though the cold finally won, it did not erase their defiance. It preserved it, frozen beneath layers of snow, waiting for someone centuries later to listen. You look out from the cliff above the fjord one last time before the light fades, the ocean below locked in ice that gleams like metal. The wind stings your face, but there is a strange peace in it. You imagine those first ships leaving, their sails snapping in the wind, the settlers watching from shore until the masts vanished into mist. They must have known even then that they were alone, yet the smoke still rose from their chimneys for 400 years. That is not failure. That is devotion. The sky above glows faintly green as night falls, the aurora stirring again, silent curtains rippling across the frozen sea. You pull your cloak tighter and head back toward the longhouse, your boots squeaking in the snow. The door creaks open, releasing a gust of warm, smoky air. Inside, the fire flickers, faces glow in its light, and the room hums with the sound of life, small, imperfect, but enduring. Outside, the wind screams against the walls. Inside, someone laughs, and that here is the truest miracle of all. The hearth waits at the center of every home, the true heart of Viking Greenland. You rise before dawn, when the cold is still a living creature crawling through the seams of the longhouse. The fire has burned down to coals, glowing faintly beneath a layer of ash. The air is dense and still, heavy with the scent of smoke and tallow, of wool and fur warmed through the night. Even the breath of those sleeping beside you has a rhythm to it, slow and misting in faint curls of frost. For a few quiet seconds you lie there, listening to the faint crackle of embers, the creak of frozen wood, and the far-off groan of the wind brushing across the roof. Then you move, because hesitation here is an enemy. Fires that are not fed become funerals. You push aside the quilted fur and crawl toward the hearth. The coals respond weakly to your breath, glowing brighter, sighing as they draw in new air. Your fingers tremble slightly, not from fear but from the chill that lives in your blood now, a companion that never leaves. You lay a few chips of dried birch bark over the coals, then splinters of pine, then thicker wood. For a moment, nothing happens. Then a single flame trembles to life, bends, steadies, and finally catches. The light floods the room in amber hues, painting the rough beams of the ceiling with motion. The first hiss of water in the kettle sounds like applause. Around you, the others begin to stir. The Vikings built their homes around this single act, the maintenance of flame. Longhouses were not just dwellings, but ecosystems built for warmth. The walls, thick as the span of a man's arm, were layered with turf that froze solid from outside but trapped heat within. The floor was packed earth mixed with straw, and at its center the hearth burned continuously. Smoke drifted upward through a hole in the roof, staining every beam black. It was not elegant, but it worked. Heat was precious and rarely wasted. Even when the fire roared, the longhouse stayed dim, as though the air itself feared to move too quickly and lose what warmth it had gained. Children shuffle close, drawn like moths. You see their cheeks glowing red, their hair sticking up in static clumps from woolen bedding. The smallest ones are wrapped so tightly in fur they look like bundles of laundry. A woman, perhaps their mother, perhaps just whoever was nearest the pot, stirs the first meal of the day. Barley boiled in water, thickened with goat's milk, flavored with a pinch of salt. It is not feast food, but it is hot, and that is the only luxury that matters. Someone passes around wooden bowls, the sound of spoons scraping faintly over the hum of the fire. You take your portion and sit near the wall, where warmth lingers longest. The flavor is plain, but the heat spreads through you like light through fog. You watch the others as they eat. A man rubs the stiffness from his fingers before pulling on a tunic of coarse wool, then a second, then a third. A young girl braids her hair with clumsy fingers, her lips moving silently in what might be a prayer. The rhythm of the morning is slow but sure, every gesture practiced, every motion deliberate. Life here leaves no room for waste, not even in movement. Once breakfast is done, the day begins in earnest. Someone brings in more wood from the pile outside, their breath a pale plume in the doorway. The logs hit the floor with a dull thump. Every household keeps a careful count of how many remain, knowing that each one burned is a day marked off the calendar of survival. In summer, gathering wood is as important as hunting or farming. The settlers scour the coast for driftwood, the only real source in a land nearly barren of trees. Sometimes the sea offers more than logs, the ribs of old ships, timbers from storms, entire trunks torn from elsewhere and gifted to the shore. Each find is a miracle. The settlers drag them home, dry them, cut them, and store them under roofs for months. Firewood is not just resource, it is currency. The hearth also gives light, and that light governs time. There are no clocks here, no candles to spare. The fire is the sun within the longhouse, and its mood dictates the day's rhythm. When it is bright, chores unfold, mending, cooking, carving, teaching. When it fades, so does energy. In the corner, a loom waits with half-finished cloth. A woman sits beside it, her fingers moving rhythmically, pulling wool into yarn, yarn into fabric, fabric into clothing that might save someone's life when the next blizzard comes. The sound of the loom is soft, like a heartbeat echoing the fire's crackle. You notice something else too, the unspoken communion. The Vikings were people of action, not sentiment, but in this place, tenderness hides in the smallest acts. A man wordlessly hands his bowl to a child who has finished too fast. Someone adjusts the fur lining around another's shoulders without being asked. These gestures replace words that might otherwise be wasted in the cold air. Love here is measured in warmth shared. Outside, the world has turned white again. The snow glitters with cruel beauty under the weak daylight. The air carries the faint metallic scent of frost. You step outside briefly, and the shock of it feels like plunging your face into icy water. The sky is pale, cloudless, almost colorless, and the horizon stretches endlessly. Mountains, sea, and sky blending into a single frozen expanse. Every breath hurts, but you breathe deeply anyway, because in this land even pain reminds you you are still alive. You return to the longhouse with a bucket of ice, the handle biting into your glove. The door creaks open, releasing a puff of warmth that smells of smoke and wool. Inside, someone feeds the fire again, and steam curls from a pot as the ice begins to melt. Water here is never taken for granted. It must be hacked, hauled, and thawed, every drop earned. You pour some into a wooden cup and hold it close to the fire, watching as faint wisps rise from its surface. The reflection of the flame dances inside it, a tiny replica of the world outside, cold darkness wrapped around one trembling point of light. By midday, the room hums with activity. A boy sharpens an iron knife against a whetstone, his stroke steady, his face lit by concentration. A woman kneads dough from barley flour and sour milk, forming flat loaves to bake on hot stones near the fire. Another tends a pot of stew, a mixture of seal meat, dried herbs, and whatever root vegetables survived the last harvest. The smell is rich, heavy, primal. It fills every corner, clinging to clothes and hair, turning the air thick enough to taste. There is music too sometimes. Someone hums under their breath, a slow, rhythmic tune that might have been a lullaby once. It twines with the fire's crackle, soft and hypnotic. For a moment you forget where you are, and the longhouse feels almost like a sanctuary, a small world beating gently against the frozen vastness outside. Then the door opens and the cold floods in again like an invading army. A man enters, his beard crusted with frost, his eyebrows white. He stomps the snow from his boots and shakes the ice from his fur cloak. His voice, when it comes, sounds raw from wind. He reports that the fjord is nearly sealed now, thick enough to walk across, maybe by tomorrow. A few nods follow. That means hunting season begins again. Seals will surface in the holes between ice sheets, and if fortune holds, the colony will have meat and oil enough to last the next storm. Evening comes without much warning. The daylight fades fast, slipping from pale gold to grey to black. The fire burns brighter, fed by thicker logs now, and the shadows on the walls sway like ghosts. Supper is eaten quietly, each bite slow and grateful. Children drowse beside the hearth, their heads resting on folded arms. The air grows heavier with warmth and fatigue. You find yourself staring into the flames, mesmerized by the way they twist and curl, as if alive. The wood pops, sending a spray of sparks upward, and for a moment you imagine each spark as a heartbeat of those who came before, every one a reminder that survival is not heroic, just necessary. As the night deepens, the longhouse settles. Boots are pulled off, cloaks folded, the last coals stirred. The fire is banked carefully, its light dimmed, but never allowed to die. Outside, the wind rises again, carrying the sharp cry of a raven. Inside, sleep folds over the room like another blanket. The last thing you hear before drifting off is the sigh of the fire, that small eternal sound of defiance, echoing softly in the dark. When morning arrives, the light is weak and grey, spreading slowly across the snow like water spilled from a cracked bowl. The longhouse exhales smoke through the roof vent, the only motion in a landscape that seems carved from stone. You pull on your boots, still stiff from the cold, and step into the pale dawn. The air bites instantly. It is so sharp that it feels clean, almost holy in its cruelty. Around you, frost clings to everything. The fence posts, the roof beams, even the eyelashes of the goats blinking in their pens. Beyond them, the fields stretch flat and white, their furrows hidden beneath a crust of snow, so hard it glitters like glass. This is Greenland in the growing season. Though calling it that feels like a joke shared among the desperate. The soil beneath your boots is more ice than earth, frozen to a depth that mocks any plough. Yet you kneel anyway, breaking a small hole with an iron tool, and reach into the cold mud beneath. The Vikings here learned long ago that to coax food from this land required equal parts faith and stubbornness. Each handful of dirt must be warmed by hand, loosened with bone meal or seaweed hauled from the shore, then covered again to trap the fragile heat of the sun. You work slowly, breathing hard, each exhale curling into white mist. The smell of the sea drifts faintly from the fjord below, mingled with the sweet rot of kelp drying on racks. That kelp is life, the secret ingredient of every Greenland field. When the first settlers arrived, they found that mixing seaweed into the frozen soil kept it dark and moist, long enough for barley and cabbage to sprout. Without it, the ground would crack and harden before a single seed took root. So each spring, the entire settlement moves like an army to the shore, gathering slippery green strands, hauling them home on sleds, spreading them in black lines across the fields. The work is filthy, back-breaking, and endless, but it is what stands between hunger and another year alive. Some of the fields are marked by low stone walls, their edges half buried in snow. Inside them, the settlers plant not just grain but small patches of herbs, angelica, yarrow, sometimes garlic, all precious, all rare. They sprout slowly under the grey light, fragile as hope. You can picture the women walking among them in midsummer, lifting each leaf gently, whispering small words to coax them higher. They know the soil is not kind, but it responds to care, at least for a season. You straighten, stretching your back, and glance toward the horizon. The sky there is darker now, clouds gathering like bruises. Another storm, perhaps. They come quickly here, rolling over the ice cap without warning, and a field can vanish in snow within hours. But you stay because the work must finish. There is no such thing as pausing when the season is only a few weeks long. The barley will take 70 days to ripen. If the wind does not flatten it, if the frost does not return too soon, if luck stays near, you smile at the word if. Greenland has more of those than it has crops. In the distance you hear the sound of a bell, a dull iron tone carried by wind from another farmstead. It is the signal for midday, for food, for rest. You trudge back toward the longhouse, your boots crunching through snow that now softens under the faint warmth of the sun. Inside, the air feels almost tropical in comparison. The fire is blazing, the smell of broth thick in the air. Someone ladles you a bowl, barley again, this time with bits of seal meat floating like pale stones. You eat slowly, letting the heat chase the cold from your chest. Around you, others talk quietly, voices low but steady. The conversation is practical. How many fish were caught, whether the milk will last another week, whether the field by the stream has thawed yet. Every sentence is tied to survival, every word weighed like coin. After the meal, you sit by the fire and thaw your hands. The skin is rough, split in places where frost has bitten deep. The Vikings here know how to treat such wounds. They smear them with animal fat and ash, a crude salve that smells foul but works. You think of how soft hands used to be in warmer lands, those of merchants, priests, or kings, and you realize how useless softness would be here. Survival has its own hierarchy, and calluses are crowns. The afternoon is spent tending animals. You follow a group of men and women to the small pasture beyond the ridge, where cattle stand motionless, their breath rising in clouds. The cows are smaller than those in Europe, stocky and shaggy, bred through generations to endure this frozen exile. Their hides steam faintly as they move, muscles rolling beneath the fur like machinery built for one purpose: to resist cold. The settlers brush frost from their flanks, check hooves for cracks, and spread hay with practiced precision. The cows chew slowly, their eyes calm and distant. Milk is drawn carefully into wooden pails, the liquid steaming against the air. It will freeze within minutes if left unguarded, so it is rushed back inside, strained and poured into vats, where it will sour gently into cheese or curdled milk. One of the few tastes of summer left when the darkness returns. Evening brings wind again, rising first as a whisper, and then as a voice. The clouds thicken, and snow begins to fall in slow, fat flakes that glitter like ash. You watch it gather on the roof, on the stone walls, on your cloak. The world narrows to a circle of white. Yet, within that circle, life continues. The hearth burns, the cattle breathe, and the sea beyond the fjord hums faintly under its shell of ice. Later, after darkness folds around the settlement, the wind roars harder. You can hear it pushing against the walls, moaning through the seams. The roof creaks like the hull of a ship in a storm. Everyone moves closer to the fire. Someone tells a story, an old one, about a farmer who once tried to sow grain during a blizzard, claiming that if the gods saw his courage, they would bless his field. They did not, of course, but his name is still spoken because courage itself became its own reward. The story ends in laughter, soft but genuine. Even here, humor survives. It has to. As you drift toward sleep, the storm still rages, but its sound becomes rhythmic, almost soothing. You think of the barley under its blanket of snow, of the seaweed lying dark and silent beneath, of the seeds waiting with impossible patience. Somewhere outside, the snow continues to fall, layer upon layer, each flake a small act of defiance against emptiness. When you wake, the storm has passed. The sky is clear and the air glitters with light. You step outside to find the world remade. Smooth, untouched, vast, the fields lie hidden again. But you know they are still there, sleeping under the ice, waiting for their brief rebellion when warmth returns. That is what life here is. A rebellion conducted quietly, persistently, against a world that does not care whether you live or die. And in that silence you feel something close to reverence. The sea is awake before you are. Even when the fjord lies under its thick glass of ice, you can hear it breathing somewhere beneath, a slow, restless pulse that never stops. The Vikings called it the sea's mercy, though mercy was the one thing it rarely gave. Yet, despite the danger, the water fed them, warmed them, clothed them, and kept their small world alive when the land refused. The fire may have been the heart of every longhouse, but the sea was its bloodstream. Without it, there was nothing. You pull on your sealskin boots, the fur turned inward, and step outside into the kind of cold that stings the eyes open. The horizon glows faintly with early light, the kind that never seems to reach full day in this land. Along the shore, figures move like shadows, dragging sleds and carrying spears tipped with iron or bone. The hunting party gathers silently, faces hidden behind fur, breaths coming in clouds. No one wastes words. You can smell the salt even here, though it is muted by the frost, a metallic tang beneath the scent of smoke from the longhouses behind you. Somewhere a dog barks, sharp and distant, then the sound fades into the endless hush. The hunters move out across the ice, following cracks and seams that twist like veins across the surface. The ice groans underfoot, but they know where to step. They have walked this frozen sea all their lives. Some carry harpoons made from whalebone and driftwood. Others hold nets or knives kept sharp with oil and patience. Every man and woman here knows what failure means. No oil for the lamps, no meat for the stew, no fat to burn through the next storm. Each step forward is a prayer, each breath a negotiation with nature itself. When they reach the hunting ground, the air is so still you can hear the faint hiss of frost forming on fabric. Small holes mark the places where seals surface to breathe. Around each hole the snow is smooth and glassy from their movement. The hunters kneel, wrapping furs tighter, and wait. Waiting is an art in this place, the kind of patience that outlasts time. They lie still for hours, eyes fixed on the ice, hands poised on their weapons. The sun drags slowly across the sky, more suggestion than presence. Then finally the ice cracks with a sound like a sigh. A seal's head emerges, sleek and glistening, steam rising from its breath. The first spear flies before the animal even knows it has been seen. It strikes true. The ice turns red for a moment before the blood freezes. There is no celebration, only relief. The hunters work quickly, cutting the carcass with practiced precision. Every part of the animal will be used. Meat for eating, fat for oil, skin for boots and rope, bones for tools. Even the whiskers are saved, braided into thread or used as needles. You can see the respect in their movements, not sentimentality but recognition. Life has a cost, and they have just paid it again. The sea has given, and now it must be thanked. One of the older men murmurs a few words under his breath, not a prayer from the church, but something older, something carried from the north, long before crossers reach these shores. By the time the hunters return, the light is already fading. The sleds creak under the weight of their catch, the air filled with the smell of blood and salt. The dogs bark as they approach the settlement, their excitement echoing between the longhouses. The entire community comes out to help, because a successful hunt is not one man's victory but everyone's survival. The carcasses are dragged toward a low shed built from stone and driftwood, the kind that stays cold even inside. Knives flash in the lamplight as the work begins again. Flesh is cut into slabs, fat rendered down in iron pots, the oil poured into clay lamps that will glow softly for months. The skins are stretched and scraped, then hung to dry. You watch the steam rise from the boiling pots, curling upward like ghostly threads, carrying the smell of survival through the night air. Later, inside the longhouse, the first lamps are lit. The oil burns with a steady yellow flame, casting a warm liquid glow that dances over the walls. You can almost hear the sigh of relief in the room, not spoken but felt. The fire crackles lower now, replaced by these smaller suns that flicker gently over faces lined with exhaustion. A child sits near the hearth, dipping fingers into a bowl of the freshly rendered fat, licking them clean with quiet delight. The elders smile but say nothing. In this place, even a drop of oil is worth celebration. Dinner is richer tonight. Seal meat boiled with seaweed, thickened with barley, flavored faintly with salt from the ocean. You eat slowly, feeling the warmth spread through you like the memory of sunlight. The conversation is livelier than usual. Someone jokes about how the gods must have been distracted to let a hunt go so well, and laughter ripples through the room, soft but real. A woman begins to sing, a low rhythmic chant that might be half prayer, half lullaby. The language shifts fluidly between Old Norse and something else, the rhythm closer to the sound of waves than words. It carries through the longhouse, blending with the crackle of fire and the faint howl of wind beyond the door. For a moment the world feels small, safe and eternal. You glance around the room, studying the faces in the dim light. They are weathered, scarred, beautiful in their resilience. The lines etched into each face tell the same story, of storms survived, of frostbitten fingers healed, of children born in the middle of blizzards. These people do not conquer the cold, they coexist with it, the way fire coexists with smoke. And though they live on the edge of extinction every single day, they do it without bitterness. That quiet dignity is what keeps the colony alive. After the meal, the hunters begin to tell stories. Not all of them are about the sea. Some are about bears that once wandered down from the ice, others about phantom ships seen sailing in fog, their sails made of light. One tale tells of a man who fell through the ice and returned 3 days later, claiming he had walked beneath the sea and seen the halls of the drowned. The listeners do not laugh. In Greenland, where death is never far, such stories are not entertainment, they are warnings dressed as myth. Still, someone makes a joke about how even the dead prefer warmer climates, and the laughter returns, breaking the tension like a crack in the ice. The night grows deeper, and the lamps burn lower. You can feel the warmth thinning, the cold pressing at the edges again, but for now it is held at bay. Someone adds another log to the fire, and sparks rise, swirling into the smoke hole above. You think of the sea outside, black and endless, the ice shifting restlessly against the shore. Somewhere out there, seals sleep beneath the frozen surface, unaware that they have become the backbone of a people's survival. You wonder if they dream of sunlight the way humans do. As you settle down to rest, the sounds of the longhouse fade into a rhythm, fire crackle, breathing, distant wind. The smell of oil and salt clings to everything. You close your eyes and imagine the sea beyond, vast and waiting, whispering its slow lullaby through the night. There is peace in that thought, even as the cold seeps close again, the kind of peace only those who have truly earned survival can understand. When the cold becomes a living thing biting through every layer, survival depends not on bravery but on what you wear. In Greenland, clothing is architecture. Each layer is a wall, each seam a shield. The Vikings who settled here quickly learned that warmth was not a luxury. It was a form of craftsmanship, built stitch by stitch with the same precision used to carve ships or forge iron. You wake to the sound of a loom tapping gently in the half-light, the slow rhythm of survival taking shape thread by thread. A woman sits by the hearth, spinning wool into yarn, her fingers moving with an instinctive grace born of repetition. The wheel turns, the thread tightens, the fibers twist into strength. She has done this every day of her life, her hands knowing the pattern better than her mind does. Around her, the air smells of smoke and lanolin, that oily sweetness that clings to raw wool. A pile of skins rests near her feet. Sheepskin, goatskin, seal hide, each one destined to become part of someone's second skin before winter deepens. In a world where air itself can kill, clothing is more than modesty. It is armor, identity, and inheritance. You pull on your tunic, thick and coarse, the wool scratchy against your neck. Over it goes another, softer layer of woven cloth, then fur-lined trousers and heavy boots sealed with grease. Every piece is made by hand, and every person in the colony has contributed something to someone else's garment. The act of dressing feels almost ceremonial. You tie your cloak around your shoulders, fastening it with a bronze pin shaped like a hammer. It catches the light from the fire, a faint glimmer of gold in a world made of grey and white. You flex your fingers into thick mittens lined with hair fur, the seams stitched tight enough that no air can slip through. Outside, the cold hits with full force. The first breath burns your throat. The second numbs it. The snow underfoot crunches, crisp and unyielding. You can feel the fur lining of your hood stiffen where your breath freezes on it. But the layers hold. You can still move, still work, still feel your body beneath all that fabric. You remember the stories the elders tell of the first settlers who arrived wearing clothing meant for Iceland's gentler winds. How many of them froze before the first winter had passed. Their mistake had become a lesson carved into every generation that followed. The cold is patient, but so are needles. Fur is the first defense. Reindeer hides, when they could be traded or hunted, were the best, light, breathable, and almost impossible for wind to penetrate. But sealskin is the true treasure. It shines darkly in the light, smooth as stone, waterproof by nature. The women scrape it clean with bone knives, then soften it by chewing the edges, warming the fibers with saliva and patience. The smell is strong, animal and earthy, but the result is a fabric that laughs at snow. A good sealskin coat can last years, and it can save lives in a single storm. You run your gloved hand across one hanging by the door, its surface cold but supple, the faint marks of its making still visible like veins beneath the skin. Underneath it all lies wool, spun, dyed and rewoven, until it becomes something almost sacred. Every sheep in the settlement is precious, not just for milk or meat, but for its fleece, shorn carefully in summer, washed in icy streams, carded and spun through the long nights. The women dye it using lichens, seaweed or iron-rich soil, creating tones of russet, grey or muted blue. It is not decoration but a kind of defiance, colour against the endless white. You notice that even the roughest farmer wears some hint of colour, a strip of red around the cuff, a green thread woven into a hood, a touch of brightness as though daring the ice to notice. Inside the longhouse, scraps of cloth hang near the smoke hole to dry, their edges curling from heat. Children chase one another between them, laughing softly, their voices echoing in the dim light. You realize that laughter sounds different here, lower, rougher, like wood burning instead of snapping. It has to push through cold air to exist at all. The children wear tunics made from the remnants of their parents' old clothes, patched with fur and stitched with gut thread. Nothing is ever thrown away. The smallest scraps become mittens, ties, or padding for boots. Even the sinew stripped from animal bones becomes sewing cord. Waste is a luxury no one can afford. The old women say you can tell the temperature by how wool smells when it freezes, below -40 degrees Celsius. The scent of smoke trapped in the fabric turns sharper, almost metallic, like iron dust. Below -60 it vanishes completely, because scent itself freezes in the air. You test this theory one morning, standing in the doorway, sniffing your sleeve as the wind bites at your face. There is truth in it. The air smells of nothing at all, and that absence is terrifying. There is another kind of clothing too, the ceremonial sort. On feast days, when the cold relents enough for celebration, the settlers wear garments dyed in bright colours, embroidered with patterns of spirals, knots and animals. A red tunic might take months to create, the dye extracted from crushed insects imported long ago from Europe. The people wear them not for vanity but as memory, proof that even at the edge of the known world art survives. The church's priest sometimes complains about the extravagance, but even he wears a cloak lined with fur. Piety has its limits when the temperature drops below -65 degrees. At night, when the longhouse settles and the fire burns low, you watch the women sew by lamplight. The needles flash like tiny stars, the thread pulling through fabric with a whisper. The rhythm is hypnotic, a song made of motion. In one corner, a mother repairs her son's cloak, her eyes half closed with exhaustion. She bites the thread to cut it, then smooths the seam with her thumb. Every repair is an act of love disguised as labor. Every garment is a diary written in wool and sinew. Sometimes, when storms trap everyone inside for days, the longhouse becomes a workshop. Furs are laid out, knives sharpened, patterns traced on stretched hide. The sound of scraping fills the air, steady and relentless. The children watch, learning which cuts to make, how to shape a sleeve without wasting material, how to bind the edges so wind cannot creep in. There is no written manual for this craft. It is taught through eyes and hands, passed down like a prayer. You understand then that clothing here is more than protection. It is continuity. It keeps not just bodies warm but traditions alive. You lie back near the fire, running your fingers over the seams of your cloak. Each one tells a story. This patch came from an old sail, torn in a storm. That fur was taken from a seal hunted 2 winters ago. The thread holding it all together came from the gut of a sheep long since eaten. You realize you are wearing history, stitched into every fiber, warmed by every flame that ever burned in this place. The cold may own the land, but you wear its defeat upon your shoulders. Outside, the wind picks up again, brushing against the longhouse with a sound like breathing. The fire shifts, its light flickering across the walls. Someone hums a low tune, half song, half prayer. You close your eyes and listen, the sound wrapping around you like another layer. And for the first time in hours, you forget that the air beyond these walls could kill you in minutes. Because here, surrounded by fur and fire, thread and memory, warmth feels almost eternal. The church bell sounds faint and hollow in the frozen air, a single metallic note that drifts across the valley and fades before it reaches the next farmstead. You pull your cloak tighter, feeling the cold work its way through the seams, and begin the slow walk toward the small wooden chapel. It stands alone at the edge of the settlement, its roof bowed under the weight of snow, its door framed by rough beams carved with both crosses and runes. Faith in Greenland is not simple. It is layered, stitched together like the clothing that keeps you alive. Inside, men and women bow their heads before a wooden Christ, but in the folds of their cloaks they still carry Thor's hammer. You do too, tucked against your chest like a secret heartbeat. The door creaks as you push it open. Warmth meets you first, then the smell of tallow candles, pine smoke, and damp wool. The interior is small, barely enough to hold 20 souls, but it glows softly in the candlelight. The priest stands near the altar, his beard rimmed with frost despite the fire burning in the corner. His Latin comes slowly, his accent still shaped by the fjords of Iceland. Few understand the words fully, but everyone listens because the sound itself feels holy, a kind of spell against despair. The walls creak with wind, but the voices inside rise steady and sure, carrying hymns up to a ceiling blackened with smoke. You kneel, the wooden floor cold against your knees. The priest speaks of endurance, of how Christ endured the desert and the cross, and how the settlers must endure the ice in the same way. You think of that comparison and almost laugh. His desert was warm. Still, you bow your head, not because of belief alone, but because in this place ritual matters more than logic. Faith is not a question of truth, but of rhythm. The prayers fill the same role as the heartbeat of the fire, a sound that reassures you that life, however fragile, continues. When the sermon ends, the priest blesses each person with a drop of melted snow. His hand trembles slightly, but his eyes are bright. You see gratitude in them, not pride. He knows that survival here is a kind of worship all its own. Outside, people linger near the doorway, reluctant to step back into the cold. They talk in low voices, some about God, others about weather, most about both. The line between the two has always been thin here. You step outside into the blinding white. The sky has cleared and the sun hangs low, a weak disk behind a haze of ice crystals. Around you the snow sparkles, too beautiful to belong to any god of mercy. You pass a man carving something into the post beside the church door, a small hammer shape. He glances at you, smiles, and shrugs. Just in case, he says quietly. You nod, understanding. In Greenland, there is no contradiction in praying to two gods. When the cold takes men's lives without warning, you ask help from anyone who might listen. Back in the longhouse, the fire burns higher than usual. Someone has found a new piece of driftwood, and the flames climb eagerly. The sound of laughter rises with the smoke. You sit beside the hearth, unfasten your cloak, and hold your hands to the warmth. Across the room, a young boy recites verses taught by the priest earlier that morning. His voice trembles on the Latin, then steadies as he repeats them in the old tongue instead. The adults smile faintly, approving. Faith, like warmth, must adapt or die. But there are other rituals, older ones, that still live in the shadows of these walls. When the wind howls too long, when illness creeps through the livestock, when the ice cracks in ways that sound like voices, the settlers turn to the old ways without speaking of them. You have seen the signs, the small bundles of herbs hung over doorways, the circle of bones buried near the hearth, the way some still pour a drop of milk onto the ground before drinking, a gift to the unseen. The priest pretends not to notice. Perhaps he knows that even the saints would understand such bargains. At night, the aurora rises again, green and white curtains shifting across the sky. The people step outside to watch, breath steaming, eyes wide. Some make the sign of the cross. Others whisper that the lights of Valkyries riding to carry the souls of fallen hunters. Both explanations fit. You stand among them, the snow creaking beneath your boots, the light washing over faces that glow pale and awestruck. The silence is absolute except for the faint hiss of the sky itself. In that moment, you understand why the Norse built temples before they built towns. The world is its own cathedral here. You return inside, your head still full of the aurora's shimmer. The longhouse feels smaller now, the firelight more fragile, as though it too could vanish into that vastness above. Someone begins to tell a story about how Thor once struck the sea ice with his hammer, shattering it to free the whales trapped below. The children lean closer, eyes shining. The story shifts midway, blending with the Christian tale of Jonah and the whale, until no one is entirely sure where one ends and the other begins. No one minds. In Greenland, mythology is a communal act of remembering, truth and imagination woven together until they keep each other warm. Later, when the children sleep, the adults talk quietly about omens. A trader's ship has not returned from Iceland. The cattle are thinner this year. The sun seems lower even at midday. The priest says these are trials sent to test faith. The old men say it is the gods reminding them they live on borrowed time. You listen without speaking, feeling the weight of both explanations pressing equally on your chest. Before you sleep, you reach under your tunic and touch the small hammer again. It is warm from your skin. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the roof beams. You whisper a quick prayer to Christ, to Thor, to anyone who will hear, and close your eyes. The last thing you feel before dreams take you is the soft heat of the fire on your face, steady and alive. The sea that once brought life to the settlement now sleeps under a lid of ice so thick it looks eternal. You stand on the ridge above the fjord, the wind clawing at your cloak, and stare out across the frozen water. Somewhere far beneath your boots, the bones of ships rest in silence, trapped in the same ice that killed them. The Vikings of Greenland learned early that trade was their artery to the outside world. Ivory, furs, and wool flowing one way, iron, timber, and grain returning the other. But the sea is fickle, and in years like this one, it closes its gates without warning. Months pass without a single sail, and the horizon becomes a promise unkept. You remember the last ship that came, a small nar battered by storms, its crew half-starved and hollow-eyed. They had brought news from Norway, but the words felt like stories from another lifetime. Wars among kings, famine in Iceland, a bishop demanding tithes from a colony too poor to feed itself. The traders had carried little beyond rumor and desperation, yet the settlers gathered around them like children near a fire, hungry for anything that smelled of home. When they left again, their sails patched and pale, they promised to return in spring. That was 2 years ago. No one says it out loud anymore, but everyone knows those men are ghosts now. Inside the longhouses, time begins to lose meaning when ships stop coming. Ivory tusks from walrus hunts gather dust, yellowing like teeth. Piles of sealskin sit unused in storage pits. The air thick with the smell of oil and decay. Trade routes are like veins. When they close, the body starves slowly. Iron tools dull and cannot be replaced. Needles break, lamps crack, the last coins vanish into memory. A farmer sharpens his plough blade on stone until it shrinks to half its size. A blacksmith runs out of charcoal and begins melting scraps of broken metal to forge new nails. Everything becomes smaller, thinner, weaker. The settlers still tell themselves the ships will return. They polish tusks and wrap them in linen, stack them neatly in crates, and store them beside the docks under driftwood roofs. The crates sit there like offerings to the sea, waiting for buyers who will never come. In summer, children play among them, pretending they are treasure chests. In winter, the snow buries them completely, and for a few months the illusion is perfect. Everything appears whole again, untouched by decay. Yet beneath the surface, unease grows. Some whisper that the world has shifted, that the sun hangs lower now, that the seasons themselves are turning against them. Others blame the gods, or the church, or simply luck. You can feel the tension even in silence, the way people glance toward the ocean, as if it might explain itself. The priest tries to soothe them with words about endurance, but his voice trembles now when he speaks of God's mercy. Even he knows that mercy has limits here. The last attempt at trade came when a small group of men tried to sail east in a repaired fishing boat. They loaded it with tusks, sealskins, and dried meat, praying that the ice would break long enough to give them passage. The entire settlement watched them push off from shore, their sails stiff with frost, their figures shrinking into the fog. Weeks later, a piece of that same sail washed up along the coast, torn and rimmed with salt. The sea keeps its secrets, but sometimes it returns pieces as reminders. Without trade, isolation becomes a kind of second weather, heavier than snow, colder than wind. People begin to withdraw into themselves. The conversations by the fire grow shorter, the laughter rarer. Visitors from nearby farms stop coming as often. You notice it one evening when the longhouse feels too quiet, the air too still. The stories that once filled the night now die halfway through, their endings left unspoken. Even the children seem subdued, their pace slower, their eyes older. You realize that loneliness has a sound, and it is the crackle of a fire when no one speaks around it. Still, life continues in its stubborn rhythm. The hunters go out when the weather allows, returning with fish or sometimes nothing. The women tend the fires, the animals, the loom. The routines hold everything together like stitches in a fraying cloak. But there are signs that the world is shifting in ways no one can ignore. Winters grow longer, harsher, summers shrink, the sea ice takes longer to melt each year, and the animals grow scarcer. A few seals still appear near the fjord, but they are leaner, their fur patchy. Even the birds migrate differently now, their patterns broken. One night as you sit by the fire, a man bursts into the longhouse, his face white with cold and fear. He claims he saw a ship drifting near the coast. No sail, no crew, just a dark shape half buried in ice. The others follow him out into the night, torches held high, their flames trembling in the wind. You go too, your heart pounding. And there it is, in the moonlight, a small vessel wedged between slabs of ice, its hull cracked, its deck frozen solid. The wind makes the ropes hum like strings on an instrument. You climb closer, your boots crunching on the ice, and peer inside. No bodies, no signs of struggle, only frost-covered crates, some still sealed. You touch the side of one, your glove sticking briefly to the frozen wood. Ghost ship, someone whispers. The name fits. When they open the crates, they find what they expected. Tusks, furs, a few tools, and a single book, its pages stiff and unreadable from moisture. The priest takes it reverently, though he knows it cannot be saved. Back in the longhouse, he sets it near the fire to dry. The pages curl and blacken at the edges. For a moment the words seem to move, but then they are gone. Perhaps it was a Bible, perhaps a ledger. It does not matter. The meaning burned away centuries ago. Days later, the sea closes completely, sealing the ship inside forever. Snow falls again, covering it like a shroud. The people stop speaking of it. The priest says it was a test, a warning. The elders say it was simply the sea reminding them who rules here. Either way, the lesson is clear. Greenland keeps what it takes. Weeks pass, then months. The fires burn lower each night. Food grows scarce, and the smallest cracks in the walls let in winds that feel sharper than blades. You begin to dream of sails on the horizon, white against the grey, moving closer until you wake to nothing but snow. Sometimes when you look toward the sea, you think you see them again, phantom ships sliding silently across the ice, their crews made of mist. You do not mention it to anyone. Some dreams are too fragile to share. Inside, the longhouse glows with the faint orange of embers. The air is heavy, still. You sit close to the fire, hands stretched toward the heat, listening to the wind scrape against the door. The sound is almost human, like whispering. You close your eyes and imagine the world beyond the ice, where ships still sail, where markets buzz with voices, where the sun feels warm. Then you open them again, and the illusion fades. Here, there is only the frozen sea, the silence of the waiting, and the faint crackle of fire holding back the dark. Hunger in Greenland does not arrive as panic. It creeps in quietly, disguised as smaller portions, as laughter that ends a little sooner, as the faint sound of a stomach growling beneath the noise of the fire. The first sign is not emptiness, but caution, the way mothers begin to weigh food before cooking, the way men chew slower, as if time itself might fill the gaps between bites. You feel it one morning when you wake and realize the air smells only of smoke. No broth, no porridge, just ash and cold. The cattle were the first to die. Even in the best years, there was never enough hay to see them all through winter, and this year the summer had been short, the grass thin and brittle. You remember the morning it happened. The snow had not yet stopped falling, and the barn was heavy with the smell of rot. The animals lay where they had stood, eyes clouded, ribs sharp beneath skin. Someone muttered a prayer, someone else cursed softly. The bodies were dragged outside and left for the dogs, but even the dogs hesitated, as if they knew this was a boundary they were not meant to cross. The loss of livestock meant no milk, no hides, no warmth from their breath in the barn. The longhouses grew colder that week, and the air inside turned stiller. You could feel despair like an extra presence in the room, sitting among you, listening. A woman tried to stretch flour by grinding dried fish bones into it. The bread that resulted was grey and bitter, but everyone ate it anyway. Hunger erases pride faster than it erases hope. You begin to measure time by how long it has been since you last felt full. The body adjusts, slowly, cruelly. At first, hunger is sharp, a pain that gnaws, but then it dulls, replaced by a lightness that feels almost holy. You start to understand why the old monks once starved themselves in search of visions. After several days, even your dreams begin to taste of food. You wake with the ghost of flavor on your tongue. Honey, berries, warm butter, things that have not existed here in years. Outside, the wind scours the valley. The snow moves like smoke, covering everything. No one speaks much anymore, not from sadness but to conserve breath. Each trip to the shore becomes an ordeal. The ice has thickened, sealing the fjord completely. Hunting parties return empty-handed, faces pale and hollow beneath frost. The few seals that remain have moved farther out to sea beyond reach. You hear rumors of a man who walked across the ice for 2 days and never came back. The dogs found only his staff frozen upright in the snow like a gravestone. In the longhouse, the fire burns low, the woodpile is almost gone, and every log now feels like a confession. Each one burned means another night closer to darkness. The air smells faintly of desperation, of smoke mixed with tallow and sweat. Children sleep longer now, their bodies conserving energy. When they wake, their eyes are glassy and far away. You have stopped counting days because they all look the same. Grey light, white horizon, black night. One evening, someone brings in a bird, a thin grey thing caught in a snare near the barn. It is barely more than feathers and bone, but it is enough to stir the room. The woman who caught it plucks it carefully, her hands trembling from cold, not excitement. The smell of cooking meat fills the air, faint but unmistakable. For the first time in weeks, people smile. You each receive a taste, no bigger than a coin, and for a moment you forget how fragile you have become. The taste feels like memory itself, a reminder that warmth once lived here, that life once had flavor. But hunger returns faster than it leaves. Soon after, someone suggests slaughtering the last goat. There is a pause, then quiet agreement. The animal is old, its milk nearly gone. You stand outside and watch as the knife flashes. No one speaks, and when it is done, the blood steams briefly before freezing on the ground. The meat lasts 2 days. The bones are boiled 3 times until they crumble into powder, then mixed with broth made from seaweed. It tastes of nothing, but it fills the mouth. Nights grow longer still. The aurora no longer feels magical but mocking, green fire dancing above a world going dark. The priest continues his sermons. Though his voice has grown thin, his cheeks hollow, he says famine is a trial, that those who endure will be rewarded. You notice that he no longer eats with the others. Perhaps he believes his own words. Perhaps he simply cannot bear to watch. When people start disappearing, no one asks where they have gone. The snow covers all evidence, merciful and efficient. The old die quietly, sometimes in their sleep, sometimes sitting near the fire with their hands folded. The young survive by instinct, by some primitive will that outlasts reason. There are whispers, always whispers, of darker things, of bones found stripped clean, of meat shared without question. You never see it, but you can feel the shame in the air. No one looks one another in the eye for long. Hunger turns even silence into accusation. One night, the wind howls so loud it drowns out thought. The roof groans. The walls shudder. You lie awake, staring at the rafters, counting your breaths. Beside you, someone mutters in sleep, the same word over and over. Bread. You turn toward the fire, which has burned down to a faint glow. The coals pulse like a heartbeat, slow and fragile. You rise and feed it. The last scrap of wood, a broken tool handle. The flame catches weakly, enough to paint the room in orange. For a moment it feels like life. By morning the storm has passed. The air is clear and still, the kind of cold that makes sound brittle. You step outside and see the valley blanketed in light, so bright it hurts. The snow hides every scar, every sin. For a brief second, it almost looks peaceful, as though nothing terrible has ever happened here. You close your eyes and imagine spring, even though you know it will never come soon enough. When you return inside, the longhouse smells faintly of smoke and something sweet. Someone has burned a handful of herbs, a ritual for the dead or perhaps for the living. It does not matter which. You sit by the fire, your stomach hollow, your hands trembling. The world outside is white and endless, but inside there is still a single point of warmth. You focus on it because that is all you can do. Survive the hour, then the next. The old man near the hearth begins to hum, low and broken. You recognize the tune, an old seafarer's hymn. The others join in one by one, their voices thin but steady. It is not joy, not even hope. It is simply proof that breath still exists. And in this place, that is victory enough. By the time the last spring arrives, the settlement is quieter than it has ever been. The snow melts slower now, reluctant to leave, as if the land itself has grown tired of the cycle. The fjord, once the heart of every dream, remains locked in ice long past the season of thaw. You walk down to the shore, the wind whispering through the hollows of your hood, and stare out over the frozen water. In the distance, the mountains glow faintly pink under a weak sun. They look almost gentle from here, but you know better. The cold does not soften, it only hides behind light. You can count the remaining longhouses on one hand. Most stand empty, their roofs collapsed, their walls caved inward as if bowing to something unseen. Inside, the air smells of ash and old wool. Objects still sit where their owners left them. Bowls, tools, a child's shoe. Everything looks as though life merely stepped outside for a moment and never came back. The silence is so complete that even your own footsteps sound like trespass. The few who remain gather together each night around a single fire. There is no laughter anymore, but neither is there fear, only a kind of exhausted peace. No one speaks of rescue, no one speaks of ships. Hope at this point feels like an indulgence no one can afford. Instead, they talk about memories, the harvests that once filled barns, the feasts when the fjord shone blue and open, the first summer when Eric the Red himself declared that this land would make them rich. The irony is not lost on anyone. Greenland was meant to be a promise, but promises mean little to ice. You sit close to the fire, watching the flames move in slow, deliberate curls. The air is thick with the smell of seal oil, the smoke rising like incense in a church whose ceiling has long since vanished. One man still wears a small silver cross, its surface tarnished, the chain hanging loose against his collarbone. Another carries a hammer-shaped pendant made of bone. They do not argue about gods anymore. They both simply keep them near, not as symbols of power, but as relics of comfort. Outside, wolves have grown bold. You can hear them at night, their cries echoing down from the mountains, long and sorrowful. Sometimes they venture close enough that you can see their shadows moving against the snow, thin, elegant, patient. You do not fear them. The wolves are only doing what hunger demands. In a way, they are mirrors of you. The priest, if he can still be called that, speaks softly now, his voice hoarse from years of cold and smoke. He tells you that God has not abandoned this place, that he is simply silent, the way the sea is silent before a storm. You do not argue. Words have lost their sharpness here. There is no need for conviction, only endurance. Yet sometimes when he looks into the fire, you see something like doubt flicker across his eyes. The final days arrive, not with catastrophe, but with calm. The weather clears, the wind stills, and for a brief span of time the sky turns an impossible blue. You step outside one morning and see the fjord glistening in light, the ice reflecting every color of the spectrum. It is breathtaking. So much beauty. It feels cruel. You stand there for a long time, your breath rising in slow clouds, wondering if the first settlers saw it this way too, if they felt the same awe, the same disbelief that such perfection could exist beside so much suffering. You wander through the empty fields, now nothing more than stretches of frozen earth. The fences have fallen, the church bell lies half buried in snow, its surface cracked. You brush it with your gloved hand and the metal hums faintly, a low ghost of sound that fades into the air. It feels like the last voice of the colony itself, ringing for no one. When night falls, you climb the hill above the settlement. The sky above burns with green and violet light, the aurora rippling like fabric stirred by invisible hands. The sight is so vast, so indifferent, that it takes your breath away. You think of all those who came before, the men and women who crossed the sea believing they could tame this place, who built farms from stone and faith, who fought storms and famine and time itself. You realize they were not defeated by the cold so much as absorbed by it. The land did not kill them, it claimed them, folded them back into itself. In the ruins below, faint light flickers from the last hearth. You imagine it burning through the night, just as countless others once did, a small defiance against endless darkness. Perhaps, in the centuries to come, travelers will find these stones and wonder who lived here, who dreamed of life at the edge of the world. They will dig through the ash and find fragments, a comb, a nail, a carved charm, and they will tell stories about you, about the people who lived where no one should have lived, and maybe, in those stories you will live again. You turn back toward the longhouse, your boots crunching over snow that glows faintly in the moonlight. Inside, the air is still warm. The fire burns low but steady. The priest is asleep, his lips parted, a faint smile on his face. Someone has placed more wood on the fire, enough to last the night. You lie down beside it, listening to the slow rhythm of the flames. Outside, the wind sighs through the cracks, gentle now, almost affectionate. You close your eyes, and the sound of the sea comes back to you. Not as it is now, silent and frozen, but as it was, roaring alive, full of foam and salt. You remember sails snapping in wind, the creak of ships, the laughter of men who believed the world was theirs to conquer. You remember sunlight on water, and then, as sleep drifts over you, those memories fade into the same stillness that has claimed everything else. Centuries will pass before anyone returns to these shores. When they do, they will find the bones of houses, fragments of tools, perhaps a few letters written in ink that has long since turned to dust. They will call it mystery, the disappearance of the Greenland Norse. But for you, there is no mystery at all. You know how it ends, not with violence, but with quiet, not with screams, but with sighs, the last breath leaving lips too cold to form words. The fire flickers once more, then steadies. Outside, the aurora shifts, green light sliding across the valley like a hand closing over the world. You feel warmth one last time, a soft bloom that spreads through your chest, and then nothing but peace. The kind of peace that comes when struggle finally stops, when even the cold must rest. Somewhere far away, a candle goes out. The story settles into silence now, like snow falling on an empty field. The last of the fire has faded into embers, small red eyes blinking weakly in the ash. You sit there in the dark, hearing only the soft crackle of cooling wood, the long, slow exhale of a world that has stopped resisting. The air feels different, no longer biting, no longer cruel, just still. Outside, the wind has gone quiet, as though it too has grown weary of moving through centuries of frost. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear the rhythm of the past still pulsing beneath the ice, the whisper of oars cutting through dark water, the murmur of voices speaking a language long dissolved into time, the faint clang of iron against stone. It is all still there, caught in layers of frozen memory. The Vikings did not vanish. They merely became part of the landscape, folded into the hills, the rivers, the fjords, their warmth diffused into the same earth that once tried to break them. In the end, that is all history ever does. It quiets its heroes until they become scenery. You let your thoughts drift now, gently, the way snow drifts over ruins. The images come slower, softer, a hand reaching toward a fire, a seal surfacing in a hole of ice, a priest whispering a prayer that no one answers, a single hammer pendant glinting in the dark. Then even those fade, like stars vanishing before dawn. What remains is only calm. The candlelight in your mind flickers once, twice, and steadies. You breathe in, slow and even. The air feels cold but clean. You exhale, and the sound is almost like wind moving through pine. The story you have followed for so long loosens its grip, its edges blurring until it feels less like a memory and more like a dream you have wandered through. Maybe you were the farmer tending frost-bitten fields. Maybe you were the hunter crossing the ice. Maybe you were just the quiet witness, the one who listened until the last voice faded. Either way, you have made it through the night. The fire is gone, but the warmth remains somewhere deep, steady as the pulse under your ribs. You can rest now. The struggle, the hunger, the endless white, all of it fades behind your eyelids. All that's left is breath. All that's left is peace. The world outside holds its silence perfectly. The snow lies smooth and unbroken. Somewhere above, the northern lights ripple one final time, soft as silk, bright as memory. Then they too dim, dissolving into grey. And like a candle going out, the story ends.